poetry. So the world is your oyster. What are some of the methods job seekers can use to identify areas to upskill in? I mean, you talked about some of it in actually even asking AI, hey, here's my job, here's my role, what sort of skills could I need? Any other ideas beyond that?
Yeah, so if we think about those transferable human soft skills that we talked about earlier, there's actually a number of ways you can identify, do you need to improve in one of them? I don't know, creative thinking or communication or negotiation. You can take assessments for that. Harvard offers some, I'm sure. And, asking for feedback from your peers, if you're, in a working environment right now, is another great way to get feedback on, okay, which of these things might be areas that I could focus on or improve. If we think about specific skills that are for particular roles or industries, you can also go look at patterns in job descriptions. So for example, on Indeed, alongside salary benchmarks that we show, we oftentimes can show skills that are highly in demand. I'll give one specific example. We were just looking last week. If you were looking to become a marketing manager, Pardot and Marketo are two skills right now that are trending upward and actually bring in more pay. So you can also make the connection between skills that seem to be growth skills in an industry or job category, and are they associated with more pay in that sector. And then lastly, if you think about, networking or joining an online community of professionals, what skills should I learn is a really easy question to ask. Fishbowl, we have a sister company, Fishbowl, which is part of Glassdoor, has a lot of active professional communities, and on that, Women in Tech is one that I like to engage with, and there's a lot of cool threads there on, well, what skills should you build, and how do you think about this particular type of career? So those are just some easy ways to think about, getting more intelligence.
One thing you mentioned that I think people grossly underestimate the power of is the tools like you have with respect to what particular skills will do and how it will do for you from a salary standpoint. Yeah. And the reason that's important is because it then gets very easy to do the cost-benefit analysis. If learning a particular skill is going to get you $10,000 more a year in salary, and you can take a course for $2,000 that is going to get you that skill, it's a pretty sure bet, right? I mean, there obviously are some nuances that'll play in there, but we'd like to call that kind of a skills or market arbitrage. For those who don't know, arbitrage being the business term related to kind of price discrepancies in a market and taking advantage of them. That's a perfect example of how you can use arbitrage in your personal life to get a skill that will allow you to get financial benefits beyond what you spent to get that skill. A little outside of the questions that we had talked about before, but I'm curious, what are the sorts of mistakes that people make that you see when it comes to trying to either communicate their skills or just more generally when it comes to approaching the job market? Because there's always people that you hear from in a really hot market will say, well, I've been looking for 1.5 years and it just hasn't worked out for me. What are the sorts of things that immediately come to your head when you hear that from folks?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to not assume that the employer can take from the resume all of the skills that you have. Employers really do struggle, and again, we study this problem in depth as part of what we do at Indeed. They struggle and they get wrong a lot what skills you might have based on past roles and responsibilities. And so, I think it's a mistake to not be a bit more intentional about how you convey the skills that you have and how you bring them to life. And that's not just about one artifact. That's also about, how individuals bring it to life in an interview or how they talk very specifically about skills. And honestly, it takes a little bit of reflection because maybe we're not all used to thinking about all of the skills that people amass over the course of their student life and career. And even when you're just starting coming out of college or you're transitioning into a full-time role for the first time, there are a lot of skills you've gained that are transferable, but people make the mistake of assuming if they're not the exact same thing in this context for this industry, it probably won't work. And so I also see people taking themselves out of consideration for a role prematurely because they think a skill isn't transferable or it's a different industry, they wouldn't consider me, and actually they would have. I don't know, those are a couple of the things that I would call out.
Yeah, I think in my experience, you're right too, and I think it's also a great opportunity for a cover letter that takes the specific, not just a generic cover letter, but you're interested in a job X and really looking at the requirements for that job are and explaining clearly in the cover letter how the requirements for that job match the skills you have that might not just pop in a resume, to your point. And there's only so much you can say in a resume, and providing context, I think, matters just a ton.
Absolutely.
So what's a good place to start? So I mentioned earlier kind of a New Year's resolution. Maybe somebody's miserable in their job. Maybe they're just ready for a new opportunity and they want to kind of hit the pavement, the virtual pavement, and see what's out there. What's a good place to start if you're going to be looking for something new to do?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I would say is you want to make sure you are taking the time to think about what you're solving for. Mm-hmm. That might seem like an obvious statement, but people are solving for such different things for work and jobs. And sometimes, we know there's something wrong. We feel the urge to change. We want to look, but I would say start with actually reflecting on, what's most important for you, what you want to solve for. So for some people, it might be that they feel like they really need a new challenge, and some people feel like they need a shorter commute. The commute's killing them, or the pay is really bothering them. Everybody's got one, right? Yeah. And so I think that's an important thing to do. I would say, explore your options. There are many ways to research companies and research industries, including salaries and what a company might be like from a culture perspective that you can understand in advance. If you're still thinking about where you might want to bridge into, again, taking a course in all the options that we talked about is a really good option that can help you explore, might this be something that I would like? Would I actually like this discipline? Taking a course is a great way to sort of test it out. And then what I would say is when it comes to starting to apply for jobs, bringing it back to AI, let technology and AI do more of the work for you. So when you, in an online job platform, if you actually create a profile, it's not just about putting your resume online in a traditional sense. It is about helping, as part of the profile, say, well, what are the skills that you have? And what are the preferences that you have? What are you actually solving for you? That might be pay or shift or, how many hours you want to work. It could be a number of things. And then essentially what the platforms are designed to do is then send recommendations to you that align with what you've told it you want and what you're looking for. And so that's sort of let the AI help you or let the technology help you is a suggestion I would make. By the way, a lot of platforms now will recommend you to potential employers when a new job gets open that you might be a fit for. And they'll recommend to that employer, hey, you should invite Patrick to apply to this job because he would be amazing. And so that's also how sometimes these connections get made.
I haven't gotten any of those emails, by the way. So
no, well, we can talk about that. And then I think, as you think about how do you stand out, and it's hard. There's actually a lot of people looking for roles right now all over the world. And again, bringing it back to AI, have you thought about the company and the role, why you wanted it, how it fits for what you're solving for? Are you showing that you're genuinely curious about that business and what they're trying to do? And by the way, those are questions you can ask AI to get help with. What is the strategy for this company? Who are their biggest competitors? What's their biggest challenge? And Gen AI will give you a pretty compelling answer, actually. So that's another way to think about how do you prepare thoughtfully, and AI can be a great help.
Yeah, and you mentioned the education. One thing that we do every year or every year and a half or so here at HBS Online is we go out, we have an outside firm just kind of talk to past participants of ours to kind of learn what's on their mind on various topics and learn how education has impacted their careers. And we found that in one recent survey, 36% of people, changed jobs after taking one of our online courses. In our MBA program, and this is probably true for you when you were at Northwestern, it's probably a much higher number even than that. That educational opportunities are kind of obvious pivot points to explore new ideas and think about doing something new. Now, obviously, I think, and you've emphasized this as well, Maggie, you kind of need to have a plan. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you just pick any old random course and you're going to find your next dream job. But the combination of thinking through what you want to do, how you might want to pivot from what you're doing now, how education fits into that, and how you use technology to kind of sort through all of that, I think is an interesting one. And I do think that AI has made it easier in many ways for the reasons you said. You can learn so much so quickly by using the tools that are publicly available. Speaking of which, and seeking new jobs, any thoughts on career goals that professionals should add to their, kind of list of things to do in 2024?
Yeah, this is a hard one because it's so I guess my thought here is block 2 hours for yourself and actually reflect on what matters to you. I feel like for a lot of us that are so busy, there's so many things going on, it can be hard to just sit back and be like, okay, do I actually like the work that I'm doing? What matters to me in this work? Am I challenged? Do I like the people I work with? Do I feel fulfilled? What would a better job mean for me? And if you do that reflection, I think it's a lot easier as you're evaluating new options to think about, well, how good of a fit would this new thing be for how I'm thinking about what actually matters to me or what I'm solving for. And then I think my second one would be, I mentioned this already, like there are a lot of platforms that want to just send you ideas. So let them, right? Yeah. Create an online profile, tell it what you're solving for, or things that would be great. Like, I would love to make X and I would love to work remote. What do you got? And let the platforms send you recommendations. You don't even have to be actively looking to get a feel for what things might be a good match for you. And it can trigger ideas and it can, help you navigate some of the choices. And there's even ways to think about that, like looking by skill. Like, okay, I have skill X. How might I bridge that into something new? So that's, I guess, embracing the exploration part of it. I don't know that those are like concrete numerical goals, but those are two things I would say.
Yeah, well, to your point, it's a little bit of an unfair question because it's so personal, right? It all depends on that introspection. What do you want to do? The next column I have coming out probably in January on Forbes is about whether you need an MBA to be an entrepreneur. And one point I make in there, first of all, you don't. I mean, I think that's obvious that you don't even need an undergraduate degree in many cases. But one point I make about a 2-year kind of in-person MBA, one of the benefits of it is you do get forced to be taken out of the kind of regular rigmarole of a job. And it allows for reflection that I think is really, really valuable, particularly if you're looking to make a big pivot. Now, obviously, that's not possible for everybody, but it points to them what you do need to do if you're not going to do something like that. And is that 2 hours a week or whatever the number is that you mentioned, Maggie, to really sit and at the risk of sounding a little too touchy-feely, but it could be helpful. It's kind of journal about it. Write down, what is important to you? Why don't I like what I'm doing if that indeed is a problem? What are the things I would look for in a new employer? What's a culture need to look like? All those things, because I do think most people, sadly, maybe give less thought than they do to buying a refrigerator, right? You're looking for all these features. Is it going to fit in my kitchen? Is it going to have a water dispenser or not, ice maker or not? You do all this study on something like that, but then in your career, you're just kind of throwing resumes out to the ether and hoping it's going to work out, which is, I suspect you would recommend against that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome. Thinking about designing your life and designing the work that you want to have. And these are very important choices. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So we're going to go to audience Q&A now. And I have a question here from Alex that says, and you've touched on this already, but just want to make sure there's, we'll butt it up if there's something that we haven't covered, is how can AI aid in job search and recruiting? You mentioned just using publicly available AI, so things like ChatGPT to do research and find skill gaps. And then you also mentioned the flip side that that companies like yours or people who play in the kind of matchmaking between, job seekers and employers are using AI in their businesses. Anything you'd add that you haven't said already with respect to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the matching thing, I think it's important to just make sure it lands. Like there's recommendations of candidates being sent to employers and recommendations of jobs being sent to, job seekers. And so it's moving both directions, and that helps really speed up and simplify the process for both sides. They have to do less work, and that ultimately hopefully makes the process smoother and more transparent and just faster for both sides.
Does it matter, by the way? Well, let me make a statement and you tell me if I'm right or wrong about it. I would suspect that the more senior you get, the more that, at least it's still very much a person-to-person thing. Is that true versus a marketplace, or is that changing, or will it change?
Well, if you think about the matching, when you say person-to-person, let me make sure I'm understanding. Are you saying I think for a lot of roles, ultimately people are trying to get to a human conversation about, it's essentially an interview, right? They're trying to get to the human conversation. And yes, I think in more as you get more senior, that's definitely a critical part of the process. But for senior roles and for less senior roles, there is this question of, do I know what's out there?
Yeah.
And how do I get a sense of what might be a good fit for me? And there's maybe on both sides a sense of FOMO, of fear of missing out, of what might I be missing, or do I really know what all my choices are? And so I think that sentiment still holds, whether you're just starting out or whether you're more senior. I guess it depends on how very specific you're being about, no, it has to be this very specific thing, and then there's maybe a little bit less of that.
But in the old kind of, so I think of, for example, that some companies looking for a CFO, and at least historic, let's call it a larger company, mid to larger company, that they're going and hiring an expensive executive search firm, and then they're picking up the phone and they're calling somebody and saying, hey, do you know anybody who's interested? My suspicion is that's still going strong and probably will at those more senior levels. But it does sound like what you're saying, even that though, like the person in that search firm may be using AI in some form to kind of do the matching in advance to say, here's somebody that looks like a good candidate.
Yes. Okay. Absolutely, because ultimately that executive search and sort of the whole staffing industry it's an enormous industry, by the way, is still incredibly manual in how it works and labor sort of intensive. And so tools that can help suggest, and even when you interview people who are in the industry, they'll say, well, I'm going to look for people who have, this type of experience and they've been in the same role for a certain amount of time. And, so they have their indicators that are basically their proxies for probability to be interested, right? That they used to do manually. And AI can actually do that in a pretty sophisticated way at a much broader scale, way faster.
Yeah. So, it's not unlike, by the way, what I was recently I see you used to work for Google, and I was recently at a meeting with some Google advertising folks, and it's not unlike what they're trying to do in just the broader advertising market, which is be able to use AI to understand the propensity of somebody to actually make a purchase, right? And it's a similar thing, is the propensity that somebody you're going to call might actually be interested in returning the call and taking the job that you're looking to fill. I think I assume it's a very similar thing. One thing that I get asked a lot, and I don't ever have a great answer other than the ones that I think are obvious, but so now I'll throw it to you to see if you've got one. This one comes from, I think it's pronounced Helena. How do you prepare yourself for a career shift when the majority of your experience has been in one area, and I assume one area for quite a while?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, I think this is a great question, and when you feel like you've done something in one particular area for a very long time, shifting, pretty boldly shifting, can feel daunting. Like that's very human. I think I would say, are you clear on, again, what you're solving for? So you want to switch. Why do you want to switch? Like, what are the things that you're solving for in the next career or the next industry? What's most important to you? Again, if you take stock of your current skills in the industry that you've spent time, you probably have more than you give yourself credit for that are transferable to other industries. Yep. So that like reflection, and then thinking about the options that you have when you can take those skills and bridge them into something new. If you explore that with a pretty open mind, what I've generally found is people will find that there are a lot more choices than they originally thought there would be. Yep. But it requires just being, open to maybe an industry you hadn't considered, but it's actually a really good fit with what you're solving for. And then
something I mentioned earlier that could be really helpful too, by the way, is I think the networking, right? If you get involved in a group that has people in an industry or a job category that you think you might be interested in, nothing like making those connections and hearing directly. And also then they'll have their antenna up when they hear of roles that are available.
Absolutely. And then if there's something really important for that next industry that you need to learn, as we've talked about before, there are lots of ways now to get that skill that can happen in advance of getting the job without taking, another 5 years or something. Like there are pretty fast ways, efficient ways to get a skill that could really help you bridge into that new industry or new role.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we've seen people do that with the courses we offer, and there's no silver bullet. You have to kind of have a bunch of things come together, but they're not going to come together accidentally. That's why you need that kind of more deliberate plan and really have some strategy around how you're going to meet who you need to meet and get the skills you need to get and be on the platforms you need to be on, like Indeed, to find that job. One from Dr. W. Allen that I'll take is just about how AI will affect online education. What are some tools higher education leaders can develop to remain relevant in AI, and how is HBS adapting curriculum to address the evolving role of AI in business strategies? Well, not surprisingly, Dr. Allen, we have a lot of discussions about this and activity going on around this here at HBS. When we think of AI, and I'll be very specific about our context, we have these asynchronous online courses, asynchronous meaning that there's not live faculty teaching in them. The benefit of that is it makes it very easy for people to take the content when it's more convenient for them. And we're also at Harvard Business School very vested in the case method of learning. For those that don't know, that's about reading a real business scenario. And then in the classrooms, there's no lectures. It's basically the faculty having a conversation with students where everybody learns from each other to come to some aha moment. And if you imagine what that's trying to replicate that online, while we think we've done a good job of it without AI, because HBS Online was created before AI was really as big as it is today, you can certainly see a scenario where AI now acts as a professor and can facilitate interchange between individuals as if they were in a classroom. That could be hugely valuable. Certainly the tutor bots and things like that allow help for students who might be having difficulty with a particular topic. And there's a host of other ways we can do it. One thing we have done, and it's consistent with what Maggie said, is that you can't hold back the ocean. So we're encouraging students to use it. And we're trying to, there's all this fear around people using it to cheat. And, certainly there can be concerns about that. But the fact of the matter is that those concerns, just because you have those concerns doesn't mean people won't use it. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be a part of everybody's lives going forward. We can't put that genie back in the bottle, as they say. So we are making sure that we encourage students to use it and are finding ways to have it introduced into our in-person and online programs that will make it possible for people to get the benefits of not only getting more impactful learning, but also a side benefit is learning, again, as Maggie referenced, how to prompt AI to get something out of it that's useful to you. So we have about 5 minutes left. Maggie, I wanted to kind of head toward a wrap up here and ask you at more of a macro level. 2 years ago, if we had a webinar in AI, probably nobody would have signed up because they wouldn't have known what we were talking about. So I'm not going to necessarily ask you to predict the future, but if you had to think about the big macro trends in employment and hiring and being a market maker, if you will, between employers and employees, are there any big changes you see coming that might surprise people?
Well, I think about this a lot. I have 4 kids, and so I'm thinking about their what's going to happen for them. I feel like
you don't want them living in the basement when they're.
Well, yeah. Well, there's that. That's definitely true. I feel like the pace of change is so much faster than what we lived through when we were bridging out of school and into careers, and certainly what our parents lived through. And so while nobody knows, as you said, exactly how it all plays out, it's pretty clear that we all have to just be ready for roles to evolve, functions to evolve, capabilities to evolve in a way that is a couple clips faster than what any of us have lived through before. And so, I guess the good thing is it means that in some ways it's a leveler because everybody's learning this together. There is nobody who grew up with this, right? So we're all learning, okay, how do you embrace generative AI in a thoughtful way and do your work differently? And everybody's having to find a new way of making it work. I think I think we will see, roles shift. We talked about that already, depending on the percent of skills, and we will see some jobs that have existed, dwindle because they just aren't needed as much because AI does them so well. But I think for me, the thing we just have to be really ready for is the pace of it, maybe more than we all have been expecting. And I know there's been lots of people that have predicted like AI is going to change hundreds of millions of jobs overnight, and that's never what happens. But I think this change in terms of skills and types of roles and the mix of roles and what those roles actually do is the thing that's changing. And it's not so obvious when you just say, oh, marketing roles. It's actually under the hood. It's the type of marketing roles. It's the type of sales roles. It's the type of engineering roles that are changing now pretty rapidly. So I think it means all of us are going to have to keep learning forever, right? Or as long as we're engaging in these things so that we can continue to progress along with it.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. I think it's flexibility really is that if you don't kind of keep your finger on the pulse of the changes and do your best. That doesn't mean you have to go get a degree or be an expert, but just have an understanding of the tools available and how they might impact you. It's really important. The pace, no doubt, has changed. I'm a space and aviation buff, and I point out to people that between the time the Wright brothers flew and landing on the moon was 66 years. That is staggering. In fact, it even today just blows my mind away. And that was in a time when things were moving relatively slowly. So if you can imagine from that point forward, and we're pretty soon, I think in 2 years, we're going to be just as far. We will be 66 years on the other side of landing on the moon. So, I'm saying like the moon landing will bracket the Wright brothers and where we are today. And the pace of change has accelerated substantially since it has between 1903 and 1969. So if there was a word that I would throw out, it is that word of flexibility, is that we're just going to all have to be much more flexible given the pace of change, as you mentioned, because and that's why it's kind of an unfair question, because asking you to predict it, as I often say, if I could predict it, I'd quit this job and play the stock market because I'd be the richest man in the world. So we'd all be very rich. Well, Maggie, with that, I just want to thank you so much. It's been really fun for me. Always enjoyed talking about this topic. I know there's lots of other people in the world who are very excited about the topic as well. Thanks to everybody who did join us around the world for this webinar. I really appreciate it. I think we have links in some of the social channels here if you want to learn more about Indeed and Harvard Business School online and more about the topics that we've been discussing. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Happy holiday season for everybody, and we look forward to meeting up again sometime